If you're watching this video, like me, you're trying to determine which NFL teams are good and which teams are pretenders to help you pick favorable matchups when betting. Whether that is your Pick'em League, your Office Survivor Pool, or you're just trying to go against the spread. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Let's just jump right into the stats. So some of the key things we're going to look at today are net yards per play, spread value, home value, and strength of schedule. The first one we're going to look at, net yards per play. So what is net yards per play? Well, it stands to reason that if you're gaining more yards on offense than you are giving up on defense, you're going to be a better team. So the way you determine this is you're going to subtract your defensive yards given up per play from your offensive yards gained per play. And this will give you that net. When you filter the league by this, you see that 8 of the top 12 teams that made the playoffs were also in the top in net yards per play. So obviously there's some correlation between that. You'll see a few hiccups in there or a few teams that are in that top threshold that didn't make it, and there's usually a justification as to why they didn't. Now let's look at spread value. So how is spread value determined? Take your net yards per play and you divide this constant and you get your spread value. Now I'll link the article down below, but that basically you can use anywhere from 0.15 up to 0.3. I chose 0.2 just because it kind of gives me round numbers and 0.5s. I don't want to look at a bunch of decimals while I'm trying to do this. So you take your net yards per play and you divide it by 0.2 and you figure out your spread value. So for example, the Chargers had a 0.9 yard per play. If you divide that by 0.2, you're going to get a spread value of 4.5. What that number means is if you put that team up against another team, that is the amount of points that they have in favor of themselves, against the spread. The other thing we want to look at is home value over the course of the last 5 years is kind of the guideline I use. It gives you a large enough sample size to determine which teams have a favorable winning record at home and which teams do not. So much like Vegas, how they give a 3-point advantage to home teams, that's basically what we're doing here. So I took any team that was 65% or better, and I gave them a 3. Anyone that was between 50 and 64% received a 2, and anyone below 50% received a 1. Again, slightly arbitrary. You can kind of fiddle with the numbers a little bit based on your own feelings. Some reasons to look into that would be, Trubisky has only played the last 2 years, so he may have a favorable home stretch based on his play compared to the 3 years prior to him being there. So little things like that could skew the numbers, but you can change that based on how you feel. So what you're going to do is you're going to take, let's use the Bears for example. We're going Eagles at the Bears for the first round of the playoffs this week. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the net yards per play, the home value, and the spread value, and then we're going to come up with some type of conclusion. Notice I did talk about strength of schedule before. When you look at Chicago, they have had by far the easiest schedule of anyone, and they are top in yards per play. So one thing to take into account when you are looking at these teams is, did they achieve that level of success against good teams or bad teams? When you filter by strength of schedule, you'll see that of the top 10 easiest schedules in the league, 8 of those teams made the playoffs. So more than any other statistic, I think strength of schedule is going to be that determining factor as to whether your team will get into the playoffs or not. One of the things I was harping on this past year was I didn't believe Jacksonville would get into the playoffs, or at least have the same success they did this past year, because they would be versing a harder strength of schedule due to the position they finished within their division. So keep that in mind when we talk about the Bears. So Eagles versus Bears. If you look at the Eagles over the course of the season, they had a negative 0.2 net yard per play. That would give them a spread value of -1. The Bears, on the other hand, were positive with a 0.6, which would give them a spread value of 3. For the Bears over the past 5 years, they did not win over 50% of their games at home. So I gave them a 1. the way you determine this whole formula, so we're going to take that -1, we're going to subtract 3 from it, which is the Bears' spread value, and then we're going to subtract an additional 1 for the Bears. So if you're looking at this, you're going to say the Bears have the advantage by 5 points. The current market spread is Bears at -6. So that would mean the Eagles have a 1.5 point advantage against the spread. This is something interesting to look at because the Eagles did not have a very favorable strength of schedule. For the Eagles to have an advantage against the spread, there is a potential that you may want to bet on that team. Now, one thing to keep in mind when doing this is that this works really well for the regular season. And by that, I mean we're going to have weeks where there are lopsided favorites and weird spreads that you could take advantage of. When you get to the playoffs, generally speaking, the spreads are going to be a lot closer. These teams are really good. They're not that, team that could surprise people, really. Generally, we've kind of figured out who these teams are. And Vegas doesn't really give us favorable odds when trying to match up against them. But I think this does shed a little bit of light in terms of what creates a successful team. And I think when looking at net yards per play is a great indicator of that, and even more so strength of schedule. So combined with those two, as well as maybe a few other stats that you want to throw in there, you can kind of determine which teams are going to win certain matchups based on this formula. So give this a try. Let me know what you guys think. Create your own spreadsheets to figure this out. I've kind of given you some of the formulas that you can use to kind of map this whole process out. It's interesting to see how it changes throughout the year, from a 6-game stretch to a full 16-game stretch, and see which teams have trended up and which teams have trended down over the course of the season. Let me know how you guys do. Does the system make sense? Am I totally blowing smoke and this makes no sense at all? Let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you think. Happy betting, guys.